The bank manager called me in panic. "Your daughter just tried to withdraw everything." I stayed calm and said, "Let her take it all." He was confused, but I knew exactly what I was doing. The next morning, my daughter showed up at my door screaming, because what she didn't know was that account was empty, and the real money was somewhere she'd never find. Subscribe to the channel, leave your like and comment from which part of the world you are watching, get comfortable and relax, let's begin. The phone rang. My hands were in the soil, packing earth around the roots of a tomato seedling. The rich, dark scent filled the kitchen, mixing with the low hum of a gospel choir from the radio. I wiped one finger on my apron before reaching for the receiver. "Ellie Bishop," I said. "Mrs. Bishop, it's Gerald Jenkins at First Community." His voice was tight, pitched higher than usual. There was a rustle of papers, a muffled sound like a hand cupped over the mouthpiece. "You need to come down here, right now." I looked at the seedling, its delicate stem leaning against the stake. "What's the matter, Mr. Jenkins?" "It's Chloe." He dropped his voice to a strained whisper. "She's here at my desk. She has a withdrawal slip." I said nothing. The sun from the window over the sink felt warm on my neck. "Mrs. Bishop," he hissed, the whisper breaking. "She's asking for the entire balance, all of it from your primary savings." The soil under my nails was cool. I could see it, clear as day. Chloe in one of her sharp blazers, tapping a manicured finger on the polished edge of his desk. Impatient, certain of her right. "She says you approved it," Mr. Jenkins continued, his words tumbling out in a worried rush. "She says you told her she could have it for a capital investment, but the amount I had to call you. This is your nest egg. I couldn't just." "Let her take it." The silence on the line was complete. I heard him pull the phone away from his ear, then bring it back. I beg your pardon." "Process the withdrawal, Mr. Jenkins. Give her what she asks for." "Mrs. Bishop, this is over $87,000. His tone was pure, undisguised alarm now. "Are you sure? Is there duress? I can have security." "I am sure." My voice was calm. It felt foreign to me, that calm, a smooth sheet of ice over a deep, cold lake. "Make her a cashier's check. Do it politely. Do not indicate there is any problem." "But the account, it can't cover this." His confusion was genuine. He was a good man, Gerald Jenkins. He had helped me set up that account 20 years ago after Robert died. "The account will cover it," I said, with a finality that brooked no further discussion. "Thank you for your concern. Please proceed." I hung up the phone. The click echoed in the quiet kitchen. The choir sang on, a swell of harmonies about grace. My hands returned to the work. I pressed the soil around the base of the seedling, firming it in. My movements were deliberate, slow. Each motion was an anchor. The hurt arrived then, not as a shock but as a confirmation. A heavy, familiar weight settling in the center of my chest. She had done it. She had actually gone to the bank and tried to clean me out. The last week replayed in my mind. It had been a series of requests, each more pointed than the last. A conversation over coffee where she lamented her cash flow, the burdens of her lifestyle, the opportunities she was missing. How my money was just sitting there, not working for anyone. How I didn't need it, not really, not the way she did. She had framed it as a kind of business proposition. A loan, she called it. I had said I would think about it. I had thought about it. I had thought about the second-grade photo of her on my refrigerator, the one with the missing front teeth. I had thought about the college tuition I paid, the car I co-signed for, the down payment I contributed. Each time, it was an investment in her future. Each time, her gratitude grew thinner, her expectation thicker. This was different. This was not a request. This was an assumption so profound it required no discussion. She had filled out the slip herself. She had walked into that bank, presented her identification as my daughter, and demanded what she believed was hers. I finished with the tomato plant. I rinsed my hands at the sink, watching the brown water swirl down the drain. I dried each finger on the linen towel. The calm held. Beneath it, something else was coiling, taking shape. It was not anger. Anger is hot and wasteful. This was colder, sharper. It was resolve. She believed my life's worth, my security, my quiet peace, could be reduced to a number on a slip of paper. She believed she was entitled to it. She believed I was too soft, too old, too simple to protect it. I looked at my kitchen. The afternoon sun illuminated the dust motes in the air. It glinted off the glass of the frame holding Robert's picture. It warmed the leaves of the philodendron trailing from the shelf. This room, this house, was the true record of my life, not a bank ledger. Mr. Jenkins's panic was understandable. He saw a crime in progress. He did not see the preparation. He did not know about the visits I had made to his branch over the preceding months, the quiet transfers, the closure of one account, and the opening of another elsewhere. He did not know about the safe deposit box in the next town over. He only saw the empty vault she was trying to loot, not knowing I had already moved the treasure. The phone call had been the final piece. Her action required my response. For years, my response had been patience, understanding, a mother's endless capacity to absorb disappointment. That ended today. I picked up the seedling tray and carried it to the back porch. The air outside was fresh. I set the tomatoes in a row along the railing where they would get the afternoon light. I stood for a moment, my hands on the warm wood, looking at my garden. The rose bushes were putting out new growth. The lavender was a soft gray-green. It was a world of steady, slow cycles, of growth that required patience and care and the understanding that some things cannot be forced. Chloe understood force. She understood demand. She did not understand consequence. I went back inside. I sat at the kitchen table. I waited. I knew the next call would come from her, triumphant or accusatory or pretending nothing had happened. I had my reply ready. It was not a reply of words. It was the silence of the account she had just emptied. It was the void she had created with her own hands. The lesson would be severe. It had to be. She had chosen the battlefield. It was made of paper and ink and numbers, but the war was for something else entirely. It was for respect. It was for the truth that a mother's love is a gift, not a debt to be collected. I sat in the quiet kitchen, the gospel music now a distant murmur. I felt the shape of the coming days. They would be difficult. They would be painful. But for the first time in a long time, looking at the path my daughter had forced us onto, I felt a clear, cold sense of purpose. The gardening was done for the day. Other work had begun. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time. The sun moved across the floor. I did not wait for a phone call. I knew there would not be one, not yet. Chloe would be occupied with her prize. I pictured it, the scene forming with a cold clarity in my mind, built from a lifetime of knowing her and from the strained fear in Gerald Jenkins's voice. He would have returned to his desk after our call. His face would have been pale, his manner unsettled. Chloe would have been examining her nails or scrolling through her phone, radiating impatience. She would have seen his discomfort and mistaken it for bureaucratic reluctance. "Everything in order?" she would have asked, her voice smooth, laced with a false warmth she used when asserting authority. Mr. Jenkins would have nodded, unable to meet her eye. He would have sat down, his movements slow. He would have pulled the withdrawal slip closer, the one she had filled out with my account number, her name as the recipient. His pen would have hovered. "This is a very large amount, Ms. Bishop Myers," he would have said, attempting one final professional duty of care. "My mother and I have discussed it," she would have replied, the lie coming easily. "It's for an investment opportunity, time-sensitive." He would have heard the echo of my instructions in his head. Do it politely. Do not indicate there is any problem. He would have given a small, resigned nod. His pen would have scratched against the paper, authorizing the transaction. He would have instructed a teller to prepare the cashier's check. I saw her waiting, her foot tapping a silent rhythm on the marble floor. She would glance around the bank at the other customers, the muted decor. She would think it was provincial. She would be calculating what this money could buy, what doors it could open. A new car, a luxury vacation, the down payment on a larger, more impressive apartment. She would not think of my porch needing repair, or the old furnace, or the quiet security the sum represented for me. Those things were background noise to the symphony of her own ambition. The teller would have brought the check to Mr. Jenkins. He would have examined it, a ritual verification. He would have placed it on the desk between them. I imagined the paper. Official. Heavy. A string of numbers written in clean, machine-printed ink. a life's accumulation of careful savings reduced to a physical object she could hold. "Here you are," he would have said, his voice flat. She would have picked it up. She would not have thanked him. She would have inspected it, her eyes scanning for the amount, ensuring it was correct. A satisfied smile, thin and brief, would have touched her lips. It was not a smile of joy or relief, but of acquisition, of a problem solved. "Excellent," she would have said. She would have slid the check into her leather wallet, a sleek, expensive thing. She would have stood, gathering her coat. "Tell my mother I'll be in touch." And she would have walked out. The glass doors of the bank would have swung shut behind her. The sound of her heels on the pavement would have faded. Mr. Jenkins would have remained at his desk, staring at the empty chair, at the ghost of the transaction on his computer screen. He would have felt like an accomplice to a theft. He would have worried for me. He would have wondered at my calm instruction, fearing it was the resignation of a victim. But I was not a victim. I was an architect. She had just walked out of the bank holding a blueprint, believing it was the finished house. I stood from the table. My body felt stiff. The mental projection of the event was complete. It had the solidity of fact. I walked to the sink and poured myself a glass of water. I drank it slowly. The act was mundane, a deliberate tether to the present. My phone remained silent on the counter. That, too, was telling. If she felt any guilt or any need to explain, she would have called immediately with a manufactured story. Her silence was its own message. It said the matter was settled. It said the money was now hers and the discussion was over. It was an arrogance so profound it bordered on innocence. She truly believed there would be no consequences. She believed I was that predictable, that pliable. I placed the glass in the dishwasher. I wiped the already clean counter. I needed to move, to occupy my hands with simple, truthful work. The garden called, but I felt a need for something more contained. I went to the living room and took the photo albums from the bottom shelf of the bookcase. I sat on the sofa and opened the oldest one. The pictures were from my marriage, from Chloe's childhood. There was Robert, holding a toddler Chloe on his shoulders, both of them laughing. There I was, younger, my hair without the silver, smiling beside a birthday cake. The images were a record of a different economy, one measured in smiles and gathered people, in birthday candles and Christmas trees. I turned a page, a photo of Chloe at 8, gap-toothed, holding a library book. I remembered the feel of her small hand in mine as we walked home, the weight of the book in her backpack. I had taught her that some of the best things in life were free, that they could be borrowed and returned, shared and enjoyed without diminishing. I had taught her about the library's quiet wealth. Somewhere along the way, she had decided that kind of wealth was not enough. She had traded the library for the boutique, the shared story for the private purchase. I closed the album. The past was a country I could visit, but I could not live there. The present required my full attention. The clock on the wall ticked steadily. Somewhere in the city, Chloe was likely driving to her own bank. She would be presenting the cashier's check for deposit, already spending the money in her mind. She would be feeling clever, resourceful. She would be feeling justified. I knew the precise moment the foundation of that feeling would crack. It was a matter of banking hours, of processing time. The machinery was in motion. All I had to do was wait. The waiting was not passive. It was an active, watchful state. I was like a gardener who has planted a seed and must now trust the process, must water and watch, and know that the growth, though unseen, is occurring beneath the surface. I returned the album to its shelf. The house was very quiet. The peace I had felt that morning, potting the seedlings, was gone. In its place was a different kind of quiet. It was the quiet of a settled decision. It was the quiet before a necessary storm. I had set the stage. Now the main actor had played her part, exactly as I had known she would. The next act belonged to the consequences, and they, unlike my daughter, were never late. The next morning, I drove to the first mercantile credit union in the neighboring town. The sun was bright, the traffic light. I felt a sense of purpose that was both grim and steady. The previous day's quiet vigil was over. Today was for action, for securing what truly mattered. The credit union was a modest brick building, smaller and less imposing than Gerald Jenkins's branch. I had been coming here for over a decade, ever since I opened the account with a small inheritance from my aunt. It was my secret, my true financial foothold. Chloe knew nothing about it. She had never asked about my financial affairs beyond the account she could see, the one with the monthly pension deposits. Her assumptions were her blind spot. I parked and walked inside. The air was cool, slightly stale. A young teller named Amanda, whom I'd known since she was in high school, looked up from her station and smiled. "Mrs. Bishop, good morning, here for the box." "Good morning, Amanda. Yes, please." She came around the counter with her key. "How's your garden doing? My mom says your tomatoes are always the first to fruit." "It's coming along," I said. "The seedlings are in, we'll see." We walked to the vault door. She inserted her key, I inserted mine, and the heavy metal door swung open. The room was silent, lined with rows of safe deposit boxes of various sizes. Mine was a long, slender one. I pulled it from its slot. It had a satisfying weight. "Take your time," Amanda said, and retreated to the front, leaving me in the quiet vault. I carried the box to the small, private room provided. I set it on the table and lifted the lid. There was no cash inside. What lay within was a different kind of currency, one that was immune to Chloe's withdrawal slips. On top was a bundle of letters, tied with a faded blue ribbon. Robert's handwriting, sloping and firm, filled the pages. They were from his first year of travel for work before Chloe was born. I did not read them now, but the feel of the paper under my fingers was a tactile memory. They were a record of a young love, of plans made. They were worthless on the open market. They were priceless to me. Beneath them was a folder. I opened it. Inside were Marcus's drawings, saved from his preschool and early elementary years. Stick figure families, a house with a huge, lopsided sun, a picture of me with a triangle for a dress labeled Nana in his earnest, blocky print. These were the dividends on my real investment. There was a small, fabric-covered book, my mother's recipe journal. The pages were stained with drops of vanilla and grease. Her instructions for sweet potato pie, for collard greens seasoned just so, for the caramel cake she made for every birthday. This was a different kind of inheritance, one that required practice and patience to claim. At the very bottom of the box lay two financial documents. The first was the passbook for my credit union savings account. I opened it. The balance was not large, but it was solid. It represented frugality, independence, and a deliberate choice to keep a part of myself separate, secure. The second was a college savings plan statement for Marcus. I had opened it the day he was born, adding a small amount each month. It was in my name for his benefit. Chloe did not know it existed. I had always intended it to be a surprise, a gift when he turned 18. I picked up the passbook. This was the real vault, not the empty one Chloe had plundered, but this one, filled with the substance of a life. The money here was not for emergencies or for luxury. It was for integrity. It was for choice. I closed the box, leaving its treasures inside. I took only the passbook and the college savings statement with me. I relocked the box, returned it to its slot, and walked out of the vault. Amanda was back at her window, all set. "Nearly," I said. I approached her desk and placed the two documents before her. "I need to make a transfer, please." "Of course." She pulled up my account on her computer. "I want to move $15,000 from my savings account," I said, pointing to the passbook, "into the college plan for my grandson." I slid the statement toward her. She nodded, her fingers tapping the keyboard. "That's a wonderful thing to do, Mrs. Bishop. He's a lucky boy." "It's not about luck," I said, my voice quiet. "It's about preparation." The transaction took only a few minutes. She updated the passbook, printing the new balance. She provided a receipt for the deposit into the college plan. The numbers shifted from one column to another, from my security to his future. It felt correct. It felt like planting a tree whose shade you know you will never sit under. "Is there anything else?" Amanda asked. "No, that covers everything." I placed the updated passbook and the receipt into my handbag. The weight of them was negligible, but the significance was immense. I had just fortified the true legacy. The money Chloe had taken, or believed she had taken, was phantom money, a shadow on a wall. This money here was real. It was anchored to love, to time, to a future beyond my own. I drove home by a different route, past the park where I used to push Chloe on the swings. The memories were there, but they did not hurt as sharply now. They were simply facts. I had given her a childhood filled with what I had to offer: stability, books, meals at a set time, unconditional love. She had chosen to devalue that currency. That was her right. But it did not give her the right to raid the treasury of someone else's future. Marcus's future was now more secure. My own peace of mind was secured by the knowledge that I had not been reckless. I had seen this coming. For months, I had watched Chloe's hints harden into demands. I had listened to her complaints about my hoarding. I had begun the quiet process of relocation. The account at Gerald Jenkins's bank had been slowly drained, not by her, but by me. The funds had been moved here, to this quiet credit union, or used to pay off the last of my mortgage. What she had withdrawn was the final, hollow shell. When I arrived home, I went directly to my desk. I filed the receipt from the credit union in the folder where I keep important documents. I placed the folder back in the drawer and locked it. The action was final, a transfer complete. I stood at the kitchen window, looking at my garden. The tomato seedlings on the porch were holding up. They would need water soon. The work of nurturing was constant, but it was honest work. You put in the effort, you tended to the roots, and you hoped for growth. Sometimes, despite your care, a plant would fail, but you did not stop planting. You learned. You prepared the soil better next time. Chloe was in the storm phase now. She would be learning that a check is only a piece of paper until it is honored. She would be discovering the cold mechanics of insufficient funds, of reverse transactions. Her anger would be building, a pressure cooker with nowhere to go. She would bring that anger to me. I knew it. I was ready for it. My hands were clean. My accounts were in order. My real treasure was locked away, safe from her sense of entitlement. The lesson was no longer a plan. It was in motion. And for the first time since Mr. Jenkins's call, I allowed myself a single, deep breath. The hardest part, the waiting, the secret preparation, was over. Now it was her turn to react. The following morning, I performed my routines with deliberate normality. I watered the seedlings. I dusted the living room. I made a pot of tea. The house was quiet, but the air felt charged, like the moments before a summer thunderstorm. I knew the mechanisms I had set in motion would be engaging now. Banks do not operate on emotional time. They operate on processing schedules. The check Chloe deposited would have been processed overnight. My phone rang at 10:17 a.m. I was in the kitchen, sorting through a pile of mail. I recognized the number. It was not Mr. Jenkins's direct line. It was Chloe's cell phone. I let it ring 3 times. I set the envelopes down. I wiped my hands on my apron. I answered. "Mother." Her voice was a single, strained word. It was not a greeting. It was an accusation compressed into 2 syllables. "Chloe, good morning." "Don't good morning me." The words came out in a rush, sharp and brittle. "What did you do?" "I'm not sure what you mean." I sat down at the table. My posture was straight. "The check," she nearly shouted. I heard a background noise, traffic, perhaps she was on her balcony. "The cashier's check from your bank. I deposited it yesterday. I just got off the phone with my bank. It was returned." "Returned, Mother. Do you know what that means?" "It means the check could not be honored," I said, my voice level. "It means it bounced." Her breath hitched, not with tears, but with incandescent fury. "It was flagged, then it was reversed. They said there were insufficient funds in the originating account to cover it." She paused, as if waiting for me to gasp, to apologize, to crumble. I said nothing. "How is that possible? It was a cashier's check. They're guaranteed. You were there. You told Mr. Jenkins to give it to me." "I was not there," I corrected her softly. "You were there, I was here, and I did tell him to give you what you asked for." "But the money wasn't there," she cried. "My bank has charged me a returned check fee, a large one. And because I was counting on that deposit, other transactions have gone through. I'm overdrawn. Do you understand? I am overdrawn because of you." I understood perfectly. I had anticipated each of these consequences. The fee was a penalty for her assumption. The overdraft was the logical result of spending money she did not yet truly possess. "That is unfortunate," I said. "Unfortunate?" Her voice scaled higher. "It's a disaster. I have automatic payments for my car, for my condo fees. This is going to mess up my credit. This is financial sabotage." The term hung in the air between us, precise and legalistic. I considered it. Sabotage implies a secret action meant to disable, I said. You walked into a bank in broad daylight and presented a withdrawal slip for an account you do not own. Mr. Jenkins processed your request with my permission. The check was issued. The failure is not in the issuance, but in the assumption that the funds behind it were magically conjured by your signature. You knew, she seethed. The realization was dawning, cutting through her anger with a new, colder blade. You knew the account was empty. You let me walk out of there with a worthless piece of paper. I let you walk out with exactly what you requested, a withdrawal from my savings account. The bank provided its instrument. The fact that the account could not sustain that withdrawal is a matter between you and the bank's verification processes, and between you and me. Why? The word was a raw scrape of sound. Why would you do this to me, to humiliate me, to watch me fail? No, I said. The calm in my own voice was a stark contrast to her turmoil. I did it so you would experience a consequence. You attempted to take $87,000 from me without a discussion, without a thought for what it represented or what it would leave me. You felt entitled to it. I wanted you to feel the weight of that entitlement. A returned check fee is a very clear, very concrete measure of weight. She was silent for a long moment. I could hear her breathing, ragged and quick. So this is a lesson, she said, her tone dripping with contempt. A petty, spiteful lesson from a petty, spiteful woman. If you wish to see it that way. I did not argue. Her interpretation was a defense mechanism. The lesson, however, is not about the money. It is about the action. You took something that was not yours to take. The world has now given you a bill for that action. It is a small bill compared to the one you tried to send to me. I need that money, she said, the anger subsiding into a desperate, demanding whine. You have to fix this. You have to make it right. Tell Mr. Jenkins to correct it. Transfer the funds from somewhere else. There is nothing to correct, I said. The transaction was completed as you initiated it. The outcome is the outcome. You're leaving me in a financial hole. You dug the hole when you decided my savings were yours to excavate. I did not push you in. I merely removed the ladder you assumed was there. Another silence. This one was thicker, charged with a dawning horror. The reality was settling in. I was not going to rescue her. I was not going to apologize. I was not going to make it better. This was a new experience for her. I can't believe you, she whispered, but the force was gone. It was the stunned murmur of someone whose world has just proven non-compliant. Believe it, I said, and deal with it. I did not say it harshly. I said it as a statement of fact. I'm coming over, she said, the threat automatic. I will be here. I ended the call. I placed the phone on the table. My hand was steady. The conversation had unfolded exactly as I had envisioned. Her rage, her accusations, her attempted guilt, her demand for a fix. She had cycled through each stage, and I had remained still at the center. I rose and walked to the window. The garden was lush and calm. The financial storm she was experiencing was of her own making. The returned check fee, the overdraft charges, they were the first tremors. They were the immediate, practical consequences. The deeper consequence, the one I was truly interested in, was the crack in her worldview. The understanding that I was not an endless resource to be tapped, that my compliance could not be assumed, that actions have reactions. I knew her next move would be to come here, to confront me in person. She would need to see my face to try to break my resolve with her presence, with tears or with fury. I was prepared for that too. The lesson was not over. It had only just begun. The empty vault at the bank had reflected back her own expectation. Now she had to stare into the emptiness it created in her own life. I poured myself a cup of tea. It was still warm. I took a sip. I waited. She arrived within the hour. I heard the sharp, aggressive sound of her car pulling into the driveway, the engine cutting off with a jerk. I did not rise from my chair in the living room. I had chosen the armchair by the window, a position of calm observation. My teacup sat on the small table beside me, still half full. The front door did not open with a key. It was assaulted by a rapid, frustrated knocking. I did not answer it. The knocking turned into pounding. Finally, I heard the scrape of her key in the lock. She still had one, a fact I noted for later correction. The door flew open and slammed against the stop. She stood in the doorway, breathing heavily. Her designer blazer was wrinkled, her hair slightly disheveled. Her face was flushed with anger and what might have been the start of tears of frustration. She looked like a storm given human form. "How could you?" she demanded, not moving from the threshold. "Come in, Chloe," I said. My voice was quiet but carried in the still room. "And close the door. The air conditioning is on." This mundane instruction seemed to infuriate her further. She stepped inside and kicked the door shut with the back of her heel. It did not latch properly. She strode into the center of the living room, her arms rigid at her sides. She did not sit. "I want an explanation, a real one, not that cryptic nonsense on the phone." Her eyes scanned the room, my peaceful domain, as if it were a crime scene. I explained on the phone. "The check could not be honored because the funds were not there. You are experiencing the consequences of that." I took a slow sip of my tea. The cup was warm in my hands. "You set me up," she shouted. The volume was jarring in the quiet space. "You deliberately humiliated me. You had that feeble old man at the bank give me a bad check. Do you know what that makes you? It makes you cruel. It makes you a liar." I set the cup down. The click of porcelain on wood was a soft, definitive sound. "Mr. Jenkins followed my instructions, which were to fulfill your withdrawal request. The check was not bad. It was a valid financial instrument drawn on an account with insufficient funds. You assumed the funds were there. Your assumption was incorrect." "You knew it was incorrect." "Yes." The single-word admission stopped her rant for a second. She had expected denial, evasion. My calm affirmation disarmed her script. "So you admit it. You admit you financially abused me." I looked at her then, really looked at her. My daughter, 38 years old, using the language of victimhood to describe her attempt to loot her mother's bank account. "Financial abuse," I repeated. "Can you define that term for me?" "You tricked me into taking a worthless check, knowing it would cause me financial harm. That's abuse of power, of trust." "Where was the abuse of power when you filled out a slip for my life savings?" I asked. My tone was curious, not confrontational. "Where was the breach of trust when you lied to Mr. Jenkins, telling him I had approved it for an investment? The power was yours in that moment. You exerted it. You simply did not like the result." "I am your daughter. I have a right to your support." "You are an adult woman," I said. "You have a right to my love. You have a right to my respect if you earn it. You do not have a right to my bank account. Those are different things. You have confused them." She began to pace, a tight, agitated path between the sofa and the fireplace. "You've always held money over me, always been stingy. Judgmental. I needed opportunities. I needed to keep up. You never understood the pressure." I listened. This was the familiar litany. It was her justification, rehearsed and polished over years. "I paid for your undergraduate degree," I stated, a simple fact. "I co-signed your first car loan. I helped with your down payment. These were gifts. They were not obligations." "They were the bare minimum," she whirled to face me. "Other parents do more, much more. You had the money. You just chose to sit on it, to live in this time capsule." She flung her hand out, indicating the room, the house, my life. I felt the old hurt then, a familiar ache beneath my ribs, but I did not let it reach my face. I let it sit there, acknowledged but contained. "So you decided to correct my choices, to take what you decided was your due." "Yes, because you wouldn't see reason. You wouldn't listen." I leaned forward slightly. My movement was slow, deliberate. It made her pause in her packing. "Did you ever think to ask me why?" I asked. The question hung in the air. It was simple. It was the core of everything. She stared at me, her mouth opened, then closed. "Ask you why what?" "Why I might need that money. Why I might choose to keep it. Why I live the way I do. Did you ever, for one moment, think to ask about my reasons? Or did you just decide they were invalid because they inconvenienced you?" She had no answer. Her anger was still present, but it was now mixed with confusion. My question was not part of her expected narrative. In her story, I was either a generous dispenser of funds or a selfish hoarder. My interior life, my motivations, were irrelevant set dressing. "It's my money," she finally muttered, defaulting to the claim of ownership. It was my money, I corrected. And you tried to take it. The mechanism you chose failed. That is the situation. You can stand here and call me names. You can rage. It will not change the balance in your bank account. It will not reverse the fees. Only your actions can address those things now. I saw the fight drain from her shoulders, replaced by a bewildered exhaustion. The tangible consequences, the fees, the overdraft, were real problems she had to solve. My refusal to engage in her emotional theater left her with nowhere to direct her energy but toward those problems. It was a form of isolation. I don't know what to do, she said, the word small, almost lost. That, I said, picking up my teacup again, is the beginning of the lesson. You will need to figure that out. I will not be providing the funds to cover your mistakes this time. She looked at me, really looked at me, perhaps for the first time in years. She saw a woman sitting calmly in a chair, not a resource to be managed. A person, not a function. It seemed to frighten her. Without another word, she turned and walked back to the front door. She pulled it open, stepped out, and pulled it shut behind her. This time, it latched with a soft, final click. I remained in my chair. The confrontation was over. I had not raised my voice. I had not yielded an inch. I had asked the one question she could not answer. The silence she left behind was different from the silence I had cultivated that morning. It was a silence of absence, of a presence removed. It felt like progress. The silence after Chloe left was a vast space. I did not move from my chair. I looked at the closed door, then at my hands resting in my lap. They were the hands of a woman in her 60s, veins more prominent, skin thinner. But they were the same hands that had held a different silence 25 years ago, after the funeral, when the world had shrunk to the size of a 6-year-old girl who needed her mother to be everything. That was the true seed, not the money, but the solitude, the determination that my child would never feel the lack I felt staring at the grim arithmetic of a single income. Robert's life insurance paid off the house. That was the foundation. Everything else was built by these hands, hour by hour. I remembered the second job, evening shifts at the library's circulation desk after my full day teaching. Chloe would do her homework in the staff room. Mrs. Alston, the head librarian, would keep an eye on her. I would glance through the window and see her bent over her books, a small, serious figure under the fluorescent lights. I told myself it was character building. I told myself she understood sacrifice. When she was 12, she wanted a specific brand of backpack. All her friends had them. It was expensive. I showed her a sturdy, well-made one at a department store that cost a third of the price. Her face fell into a mask of pure contempt. "That's ugly," she said. "Everyone will know it's cheap." We stood in the aisle, surrounded by school supplies. I felt a tiredness deep in my bones. "It's a backpack," I said. "It carries books. This one will do that just as well." "It's not the same." Her voice was tight with preteen anguish. "You don't get it, you never get it." I bought the department store backpack. She used it sullenly for a month before relegating it to the back of her closet. I found it later, nearly new. I did not say anything. That was my first mistake. I mistook her silence for acceptance when it was the beginning of a ledger she was keeping in her head. A ledger of my deficits. High school was a series of similar negotiations. Prom dresses I sewed myself, painstakingly copying styles from magazines while her friends bought theirs. She wore them with a stiff grace, but the thanks were perfunctory. The light in her eyes was for the things I could not provide, not for the things I could. College was the turning point. I was so proud when she got the scholarship. My work, I thought, had paid off. But the university was in a wealthier part of the state. When I visited her on Parents' Weekend, I saw the change. Her vocabulary had shifted. She spoke of networking and brands and perception. My simple car in the visitor lot seemed to embarrass her. She suggested we meet off campus for lunch. During that lunch, she talked about an unpaid internship she wanted, one in a distant city. "It's about the experience, Mom, the connections, but I'll need help with living expenses. It's an investment." I asked about the practicalities. Where would she live? How would she eat? Her answers were vague, centered on the prestige of the company. I said I would think about it. I did. I calculated the cost against my savings, against the roof that was due for repair. I said I could offer a small, set amount each month. Not enough for a fancy apartment, but enough for a shared room and groceries. She was furious. "You're holding me back. Other parents are funding their kids' futures. You're so scared of money, you just clutch it to your chest." I held my ground. She did not take the internship. She took a paid, local position instead. She never forgave me for it. In her mind, I had denied her a destiny. In my mind, I had prevented her from falling into a pit of debt for a line on a resume. The years stacked up. Her career advanced. Her tastes became more expensive. The gifts she wanted shifted from help to demands, contributions for a better car, hints about a down payment. Each time the subtext was the same: "This is what you owe me. For the backpack, for the prom dress, for the internship, for a childhood she had retrospectively decided was lacking." Then came Marcus. His birth was a joy, but it added a new layer to her expectations. My role was clear to her: provide free, reliable childcare and financial support for his needs, which she defined with luxurious parameters. The organic food, the boutique clothing, the private preschool she wanted him in. I provided the childcare gladly. I fed him good food from my own kitchen. I bought him clothes that were practical and warm. It was never enough. My ways were old-fashioned. My frugality was a character flaw that threatened to infect her son. The recent demands had been the culmination. The conversations were no longer requests. They were presentations. She would outline a financial problem, the need for a newer car for safety, a potential investment property, a luxury vacation she argued was necessary for her mental health, and then pause, waiting for me to offer the solution. The solution was always my money. I had begun to see the pattern with a terrible clarity. Her love was conditional upon my liquidity. My worth was a function of my utility. The account at Gerald Jenkins's bank was not my savings to her. It was her delayed inheritance, and she was tired of waiting. The day she came over and laid out the investment opportunity, a vague scheme involving a friend's startup, was the final piece. Her eyes were bright with possibility, but also with a hard certainty. She expected compliance. My hesitation was met with a sigh of profound exasperation. "You have to learn to let money work for you, Mother. It's just sitting there." That night, after she left, I made my decision. The transfer of funds began the next morning. I moved the money with a steady, methodical rhythm. I paid the final installment on my mortgage. I bolstered Marcus's college fund. I left just enough in the old account to keep it open, a hollow shell. I knew she would not be able to resist it. The seed of entitlement I had mistakenly watered all those years had grown into a weed that would now strangle itself. Sitting in my quiet living room after her furious departure, I saw the full chain. From the little girl who wanted the expensive backpack to the woman who tried to empty a bank account. I had provided stability, education, a paid-for home. She had interpreted it as a baseline, a starting point from which to demand more. I had taught her the value of hard work, but she had learned the cost of everything and the value of nothing. The grief was there, a cold, solid companion, but it was clean. It was the grief for what might have been, not for what was. The past was a series of facts. The present was a lesson in progress. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, it was mine to shape, not hers to plunder. I had sown care and gotten entitlement. Now I was sowing consequence. I did not know what would grow, but I would tend this new crop with the same hands and the same clear-eyed determination. The afternoon light was softening when I heard the familiar, more gentle knock on the door. I had been standing at the kitchen counter, measuring flour into a bowl. The weekly ritual. Marcus's knock was always two quick taps, a pause, then a third. It was our signal. I wiped my hands and went to the door. He stood on the welcome mat, his small backpack slung over one shoulder. His mother's car was already pulling away from the curb, not idling as it sometimes did. It accelerated down the street with a haste that felt like flight. "Hey, Nana," he said, stepping inside. His voice was quiet. "Hey, my love." I bent to hug him. He hugged back, but his body felt stiff, preoccupied. "Backpack on the hook, please." He obeyed, hanging it carefully. He followed me into the kitchen, climbing onto his usual stool at the island. He watched me scoop flour, his eyes serious. "We're making snickerdoodles," I said. trying to inject normalcy into the room. The air still felt thin from Chloe's storm. Okay, he swung his legs. He was usually full of chatter about his week, about a video game, about a fact he learned at school. His silence was a loud presence. I worked on the dough, mixing butter and sugar. The mechanical action was soothing. How was school today? Fine. Anything interesting happen? He shrugged. Not really. I paused, looking at him. He was studying the pattern in the granite countertop. Marcus, I said, what's going on in that head of yours? He looked up. His eyes, so like his mother in shape, held a worry that was entirely his own. Is Mommy okay? The question was a small, precise instrument. It found the space between my ribs where the cold resolve was housed. I kept my hands moving. What makes you ask that? She was crying, he said. The words were plain, heavy with the weight of a child's observation. Last night, in her room, I heard her through the door. I stopped mixing. I placed the wooden spoon on the counter. Did you talk to her? He shook his head. She said she had a headache this morning, but her eyes were all red. He picked at a cuticle on his thumb. She seemed really mad when she dropped me off. Not at me, just mad. I saw it clearly. Chloe, humiliated and financially scrambling, trying to maintain composure in front of her son, failing, then retreating behind a closed door. The image did not bring the satisfaction I might have expected hours before. Instead, it brought a picture of Marcus, lying in his bed, listening to the muffled sound of his mother's distress. A collateral damage I had not fully accounted for. Grown-ups sometimes have hard times, I said, my voice careful. It doesn't mean everything is not okay. Did you have a fight? He asked, his gaze direct. Children have a ruthless radar for discord. I considered lying. A simple no would dismiss it, but he deserved more than a dismissal. He had sensed the tectonic shift in his world. Your mother and I had a disagreement, I said. About some grown-up things. We are working through it. Is it about money? The question was so blunt it startled me. Why would you think that? She's always talking about money. She says it's tight. She says things are expensive. He recited this with a rote familiarity that was painful to hear. Are you going to stop seeing each other? The fear in his voice was unmistakable. He was imagining divorce, a schism. In his universe, I was a fixed star, his mother was the sun. The idea of them separating was a cosmic catastrophe. I came around the island and knelt so we were eye level. I placed my hands on his knees. Listen to me, Marcus. No, we are not going to stop seeing each other. I am your Nana. That is forever. My love for you is not part of any disagreement. Do you understand? He nodded slowly, his eyes searching mine for truth. Your mother is my daughter. That is also forever. Sometimes forever relationships have difficult moments. They require work. That is what is happening now, work. I used the word deliberately. Work was something he understood. Homework, chores, work was effort applied to a problem. Is the work hard? He asked. Yes, I said honestly. It is some of the hardest work there is. He seemed to digest this. The fear in his face receded, replaced by a thoughtful calm. He trusted the concept of work. Okay. Then he slid off the stool. Can I roll the dough into balls? Of course. I stood, my knees protesting. We returned to the counter. I showed him how to scoop a uniform amount. He concentrated, his tongue poking out slightly, forming imperfect spheres and dropping them into the cinnamon sugar. As we worked side by side, the cold, righteous anger I had been cultivating since Mr. Jenkins's call began to change its shape. It was still there, solid and justified. But Marcus's simple question, is Mommy okay, had introduced a new element. It was a reminder of the interconnectedness I was threatening to sever. The lesson was for Chloe, but the fallout landed in Marcus's small, listening world. I had wanted her to feel the weight of her actions. I had wanted her to stare into the empty vault. But watching Marcus's careful, earnest work with the cookie dough, I realized a secondary, more important goal had been obscured. The point was not to leave her in the emptiness. The point was to show her there was a way out, a way that didn't involve looting the people who loved her. The point was not to win a battle, but to open a door for her, and by extension for him. Revenge is a closed loop. It ends with satisfaction or bitterness. A lesson aimed at healing is an open road. It is harder. It requires more from the teacher. As I watched my grandson, I knew which path I had to choose. The armor of my anger had a crack, and through it shone the light of his need. He needed a mother who was whole, not just wealthy. He needed a family that could weather storms, not one shattered by them. When the first tray of cookies went into the oven, the smell of cinnamon and sugar began to fill the kitchen. It was the smell of warmth, of safety, of simple pleasures. Marcus smiled, a real one this time, anticipating the treat. That smile was the real treasure. It was what I was ultimately protecting. And to protect it fully, I had to ensure the lesson I was teaching his mother didn't destroy the bridge he needed to walk between us. The strategy remained. The end goal had just been recalibrated by 2 words from an 8-year-old boy. 2 days after Marcus's visit, I found a small, cream-colored envelope in my mailbox. It was not a bill. It had no return address, but I recognized the handwriting on the front immediately. A precise, old-fashioned cursive. Gerald Jenkins. I took it inside, leaving the rest of the mail on the table. I sat in my armchair with the envelope on my lap. The house was silent. I opened it carefully. A single sheet of his bank stationery was inside, folded in thirds. Dear Mrs. Bishop *, I hope you will forgive the informality of a handwritten note. A matter has been on my mind since our last conversation, and I felt compelled to write. First, let me assure you that all matters at the branch have been settled per your instructions. The incident is closed from a banking perspective. I saw your daughter yesterday. She was in the coffee shop across the street from the bank. I did not speak to her. She was sitting alone at a small table, not drinking her coffee, just staring out the window. She looked lost. I cannot claim to know the particulars of your family situation, and it is not my place. But seeing her there after everything gave me pause. For what it's worth, I think you are teaching a lesson some of us wish we'd had the courage to teach. I have seen too many retirement accounts drained by entitled children, leaving good people anxious and vulnerable in their later years. It is a quiet tragedy. You have chosen not to be a victim of it. That requires strength many do not possess. Stay strong. Sincerely, *. Gerald Jenkins, *. I read the note twice. Then I placed it back on the sheet of stationery and folded it along its original creases. The paper was thick, expensive. His words were measured, professional, yet they crossed a boundary. He had affirmed what I had done. He had called it courage. I had not considered courage. I had considered it necessity, a defensive action. But he was right. There was a choice involved. The easier path would have been to let her take the money, to say nothing, to absorb the loss and the bitterness. To be the victim he described. I had chosen the harder, colder path of consequence. His observation about Chloe struck me. She looked lost. That aligned with Marcus's report of her crying. The initial fury was burning off, leaving behind the disorientation of a worldview upended. Her map of the world had shown my bank account as a fixed landmark, a source of navigation. I had removed it. Now she was adrift. This was the intended effect. Yet, hearing it confirmed by an outside, impartial observer gave the effect a new solidity. It was not just my perception. It was visible. Some of us wish we'd had the courage to teach. That line held a universe of regret. I thought of Mr. Jenkins, a kind man, probably with children of his own. He had likely witnessed similar scenarios from behind his desk. The pleading adult child, the resigned parent signing the forms. He had been forced to be a facilitator of those quiet tragedies. In me, he had seen someone who used the system, rather than being used by it. I had made him an unwitting participant in my lesson, but he had, in this note, retroactively given his consent. This external validation was a powerful fortification. My resolve, which had been tempered by Marcus's innocent worry, now found a second reinforcement. It was not just about my family. It was about a principle. Mr. Jenkins had framed it as a societal ill, a common pattern. My action was a private correction of a public trend. This lifted the weight from being purely personal. It connected my small domestic war to a larger, quiet conflict happening in many families. I was not just Ellie Bishop versus Chloe. I was one woman refusing a script. I placed the note in the drawer of my desk, alongside the receipt from the credit union and the college fund statement. It was evidence, not of wrongdoing, but of right action, a receipt for a different kind of transaction. Later that evening, I called him. He answered on the second ring. "Mr. Jenkins, it's Alina Bishop." "Mrs. Bishop, I hope the note was not an overstep." "It was not. I appreciated it. Thank you." I paused. "You said she looked lost." He cleared his throat. "Yes, not angry, not plotting, just still. It was midday. She was in a business suit. She should have been somewhere else. It was the posture of someone reconsidering their coordinates." "I see." "I will not mention it again," he said, his professional demeanor returning. "But I wanted you to know that from my vantage point, your position is understood and respected." "Thank you, Gerald." I used his first name deliberately, a reciprocation of his crossed boundary. "That means a great deal." We ended the call. The conversation was brief, but it sealed a silent pact. He was my ally, not just my banker. He had borne witness and had chosen a side. Mine. I walked out to my garden in the dusk. The air was cool. The tomato seedlings were holding their own. I touched the leaves of the lavender, releasing its scent. Mr. Jenkins's note had done more than validate. It had clarified the stakes. This was not a petty family squabble. It was a stand against a culture of entitlement. My daughter was a product of that culture, but she was also its victim. The lesson was meant to free her from it, even if the process felt like punishment. His words, "Stay strong," were not about maintaining anger. They were about maintaining course. The journey was through difficult terrain. The destination was not her humiliation, but her liberation. And mine. To be free of the role of endless provider, the human ATM. To be seen again as a person with boundaries and a right to my own security. As darkness settled, I felt the last remnants of doubt dissolve. The path ahead was still fraught. There would be another confrontation. It would be different from the first. The angry storm had passed. What came next would be the reckoning with the quiet after the storm. I was ready for it. I had my own coordinates now, fixed by a grandson's love and a banker's respect. They were enough to navigate by. She came on a Thursday afternoon. There was no violent knock this time, a soft, almost tentative rap on the door. I was in the kitchen, but I had been expecting her. The air had changed. The storm phase was over. This was the accounting. I opened the door. Chloe stood on the step. She looked diminished. The sharp blazer was gone. She wore a simple sweater and jeans. Her face was pale, free of makeup, and there were shadows under her eyes. She held herself stiffly, as if bracing for a blow. "Mother," her voice was flat, drained. "Chloe, come in." She stepped inside. She did not look around the living room with her usual critical eye. She simply stood, waiting for direction. "Let's sit in the kitchen," I said. "I've just made tea." She followed me silently. She took a seat at the table, the same seat Marcus used. I placed a mug of tea in front of her, then sat across from her with my own. The steam rose between us. She did not touch the mug. She stared at her hands, folded on the table. "I've spent the last 2 days on the phone with my bank," she said, her tone devoid of inflection. "Arranging payment plans for the overdraft fees, postponing some bills. It's manageable, but it's humiliating." I nodded. I said nothing. She looked up, her eyes meeting mine. The anger was gone. In its place was a hollowed-out confusion. "Why did you do it? Really? Not the reason about teaching me a lesson. The real reason." "That is the real reason," I said. "But to go that far, to let me walk out of there looking like a fool, to let me crash my finances, that's not a lesson. That's cruelty." I took a sip of my tea. It was hot, bracing. "You asked for the entire balance of my savings. You did not ask if I needed it. You did not ask what it was for. You presented it as a fait accompli. You treated my life's work as a line item on your balance sheet. That, Chloe, is also cruelty. It is a quieter kind, but it is corrosive. My response was not cruelty. It was a mirror." She flinched. "A mirror." "I wanted you to see what your action looked like. But since you could not see the action clearly, I showed you the consequence. You felt the humiliation of a bounced check. I have felt the humiliation of being treated as a funding source for years. Now we have a common reference point." She shook her head slowly. I don't understand. I'm your daughter. You're supposed to help me. I have helped you, repeatedly, but help is not the same as surrender. What you wanted was not help. It was appropriation. You did not want a mother. You wanted a silent partner. Her lips tightened. She looked down at her tea. You said it was a mirror. What was it supposed to show me? I set my cup down. It was supposed to show you the empty vault. She looked up, puzzled. The bank account. Not the bank account, I said. The one in here. I touched my chest just once. You saw my savings as a vault to be emptied. I saw your approach to our relationship the same way. A blank space where family should be. A transaction. Take the money and leave. The account at Mr. Jenkins's bank was a physical representation of that emotional emptiness, so I let you empty it. I wanted you to hold that emptiness in your hands, to see how little it actually gives you once you've taken it. The color drained completely from her face. Her hands began to tremble. She clasped them together to still them. That's not true. Isn't it? When was the last time you called me to ask how I was, not to ask for something? When was the last time you visited without an agenda that involved my time or my money? You see this house, my life, as simple, as lacking. You see my contentment as a lack of ambition. You have confused having with being. My real wealth was never in that bank. It's in this house, in my memories, in the soil of that garden, in Marcus's laugh, and it was always yours for the asking, not the taking. But you never asked for that. You only asked for the paper. A single tear escaped and traced a path down her cheek. She did not wipe it away. You think I don't value you. Your actions have demonstrated what you value. I needed you to see that demonstration from the outside. Hence the check. Hence the consequence. It was the only language I had left that you might hear, the language of finance, of loss and gain. She was crying openly now, silently. The defensiveness, the entitlement was gone, stripped away by the sheer, brutal clarity of the explanation. She was facing the hollow thing she had become, the person who tried to monetize her own mother. I didn't mean to. Intention is not the point, I said, my voice softer now, but no less firm. Impact is the point. The impact of your actions was to make me feel like an asset to be liquidated. My counteraction was to show you the result of that liquidation. An empty account, a pile of fees, a problem you have to solve yourself. That is the reality of the transaction you initiated. She put her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking. The sobs were quiet, ragged. They were not performative. They were the sound of a dam breaking, of a constructed self crumbling under the weight of truth. I did not go to her. I did not offer comfort. This pain was necessary. It was the pain of alignment, of seeing the world as it was, not as she had constructed it. To comfort her now would be to undermine the lesson. She had to sit in the emptiness. She had to feel its chill. After a long while, her sobs subsided into shaky breaths. She wiped her face with the heels of her hands, looking exhausted, raw. "What do I do now?" she whispered. "That," I said, "is up to you. You can choose to be angry with me forever. You can choose to wallow in the financial inconvenience. Or you can choose to look at the empty vault and decide what you want to put inside it instead. Something of actual value. That work is yours alone." She looked at me, her eyes red, her expression shattered. But for the first time, I saw something else there. Not a daughter looking at a resource, but a person looking at another person, seen clearly for the first time in years. It was a terrible, painful sight for her. She stood up abruptly, the chair legs scraping the floor. She didn't look at me again. She turned and walked out of the kitchen. I heard the front door open and close, gently this time. I remained at the table. The silence returned, but it was a different silence. It was not the silence of waiting or of strategy. It was the silence after a truth has been spoken. It was heavy, but it was clean. The empty vault had been revealed. The lesson was complete. Now we would both have to live with what she chose to build inside it. A week passed. The sharp edges of the confrontation began to soften into a dull, persistent ache. I went about my routines. The tomato seedlings on the porch showed new growth, their stems sturdier, a second set of leaves forming. I tended to them each morning, a ritual of care that grounded me. I did not hear from Chloe. I did not expect to. The silence now was a space for her to work, as I had told her. I had done my part. The next move was hers, if there was to be one. On Saturday morning, I was in the backyard, preparing a new bed for summer flowers. The soil was dark and rich. I was turning it with a spade, the physical labor a welcome focus for my mind. I heard the side gate open. I looked up. Chloe stood there, holding Marcus's hand. She was dressed in simple clothes again, jeans and a t-shirt. She looked uncertain. Marcus looked between us, his expression hopeful and anxious. "Nana," he called out, breaking the tension with his voice. "Marcus," I said, wiping my hands on my gardening apron. "Come see the worms I found." He let go of his mother's hand and ran over, peering into the turned earth. Chloe followed slowly, stopping a few feet away from the garden bed. "We brought you something," Marcus said, grinning. He held up a small paper bag. "From the bakery, your favorite rolls." "Thank you, sweetheart." I took the bag. "That was very thoughtful." "Mommy's idea," he said, glancing back at her. I looked at Chloe. She met my gaze, then looked away, her hands twisting together. I don't know what I thought," she said, her voice low. "It's a peace offering, a small one." I nodded. "Would you like some lemonade? It's in the fridge inside. Marcus, you know where the glasses are." "Yes." He dashed toward the house, eager for a familiar task. When he was gone, the quiet settled between us again, filled with the sounds of birds and distant lawnmowers. Chloe stared at the freshly turned soil. "I don't know how to start," she said. "You just did," I replied. I leaned the spade against the fence. "Starting is often the hardest part." She took a deep, shuddering breath. "I've been doing a lot of thinking about what you said, about the empty vault." She paused, gathering her words. "You were right. I saw you as a function, not a person. I'm sorry. It's a weak word, but it's the only one I have right now. I am sorry." I listened. The apology was not elaborate. It was bare, stripped of justification. It was an acknowledgement, not an excuse. "I accept your apology," I said. She looked up, surprised, as if she had expected more resistance. "You do?" "Yes, an apology is a beginning. It is not a fix, but it is a necessary first step." Tears welled in her eyes again, but she blinked them back. "I don't know how to be different. I've been this way for so long." "You learn," I said. "One action at a time. You brought rolls. That is an action. Bringing Marcus to see me is an action. They are small. They are a start." Marcus came back then, carefully carrying 2 glasses of lemonade. He handed one to his mother, one to me. "I didn't spill any," he announced proudly. "Thank you," Chloe said, her voice thick. She took a sip. We stood there, the 3 of us in the sunny garden. The silence was no longer hostile. It was awkward, fragile, but alive with possibility. "Can we help?" Marcus asked, looking at the pile of soil and the waiting flower bulbs. I looked at Chloe, a question, an invitation. She looked at the spade, then at her son's eager face. She nodded. "Yes, we can help." I handed her the spade. "The bed needs to be leveled. Just rake the soil smooth." She took the tool. Her movements were clumsy at first, unpracticed. But she worked. Marcus knelt at the edge of the bed, picking out small stones and making a pile. I opened the bag of bulbs, showing him how to space them. We worked in silence for a while, the only sounds the scrape of the rake, the plop of bulbs into holes, Marcus's occasional commentary. It was simple, physical, shared labor. There were no grand speeches, no promises of a perfect future. There was only this, a mother, a daughter, and a grandson doing something tangible together, building something, however small. When the bulbs were all planted, Chloe helped Marcus pat the soil down gently. "What will they be?" he asked. "Dahlias," I said. "They'll bloom in late summer, bright colors." "We can come see them then," he said, looking at his mother. Chloe put her arm around his shoulders. "Yes," she said, "we can." She handed the spade back to me. Our fingers did not touch. The transfer was careful, deliberate. "Thank you, Mother," she said, "for the lesson and for this." "You are welcome." They stayed a little longer. We drank the lemonade. Marcus chattered about school. Chloe listened, interjecting quietly now and then. She was present in a way I had not seen in years. She was not planning her next request. She was simply there. When they left, the garden bed was finished, ready for growth. The empty vault was no longer empty. It had been seeded, with an apology, with a few hours of shared work, with the tentative, fragile hope of a different future. I cleaned the tools and put them away. The house was quiet once more, but the quiet felt different. It was not the quiet of strategy or of waiting. It was the quiet of a field after planting. The work was done for now. The growth would happen in its own time, unseen, beneath the surface. It would require patience and care and the faith that some seeds, even after a long winter, still know how to grow. I looked at the freshly turned earth, dark and promising under the sun. The true legacy was never money. It was this: the knowledge that you can weather a storm, tend to the damage, and plant again. It was the understanding that the most valuable things are not taken, but built, day by day, with these two hands. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt the balance of the ledgers shift, not toward wealth, but toward peace.